The trap we found ourselves in was something out of a nightmare. As soon as we freed ourselves, the four of us, me, Eleanor, Thomas, and the faceless one who lay unconscious on the basement floor, stared at the second chest. It suddenly opened, emitting a strange bluish glow. Eleanor, pale and trembling, shuddered at what might happen next. What could it be? I wondered, peeking into the chest. Inside, I saw an egg starting to crack, making deafening sounds. Damn, why is it suddenly hatching? Looks like we're in trouble, Eleanor whispered, her face growing even paler. I tried to get more information from her, but the egg kept cracking louder and louder. A small piece of the shell fell off the top, and a blinding light burst out. We stood, mesmerized by what was happening, as the shell fragments fell one by one, the light gradually fading. Suddenly, the egg fully opened, and out emerged a strange creature. It was a tiny little man the size of a finger, made of bronze, with a body covered in patterns and inscriptions. Instead of a face, he had a clock made of crystals. His movements were jerky and mechanical, making him seem both alive and artificial. The little man looked at us in surprise, examining each of us in turn. The ticking of the clock in his head grew louder, echoing threateningly in our ears. I impulsively reached out to the creature, but Eleanor sharply slapped my hand away, making me pull back. "Are you crazy?" she hissed at me. I tried to understand what had made her react that way. "That's a chronix," Eleanor explained. "It can influence space and time. It's a very dangerous creature, and you can't touch it. We need a special tool called a grabber. It's a glove made from the skin of an abyss lizard." Thomas and I, astonished by how much Eleanor knew, listened to her attentively. Meanwhile, the chronix started moving, suddenly making a high jump, and, leaping out of the chest, it ran towards the exit. We acted on reflex, forgetting the warning. Thomas rushed forward to stop it, but when he touched it, there was a flash of blue light. The air vibrated with a spatial distortion, and in Thomas's place, a bundle of cloth fell to the floor. I unwrapped it and found a baby inside. Shock overwhelmed me, and I didn't know what to do next. The chronix, seemingly satisfied with its mischief, suddenly jumped towards me. I didn't have time to react, and there was another flash of light. The air vibrated again, and I felt my body grow heavier. A sharp pain pierced my back. My vision blurred. I looked at myself and realized I was leaning on a cane, and glasses rested on my nose. My posture had become hunched. What the hell happened? I wondered as I saw Eleanor, pressed against the wall to avoid the creature. The chronix, without stopping, jumped onto the faceless one, and another flash of light illuminated the basement. Where he had lain, only a skeleton remained. The sight made my hair stand on end. It could have been me. The danger of this creature was now clear. The chronix headed for the exit, and we watched in horror as it disappeared from the basement, leaving us in confusion and fear. Eleanor screamed, "We need to run and find the glove before this creature escapes." She kept glancing at me strangely, and I wondered what had happened to me. Carefully lifting the baby bundle, she headed down the corridor. I followed with difficulty, suspecting what had happened to me. Bringing my hand close to my face, I saw it had become old and wrinkled. I cursed and grumbled like an old man. When we finally reached the exit, the first thing I saw was the mess in the shop. Partly it was the faceless one's fault, who had broken in earlier, but also the chronix. Apparently, it had touched wooden items, turning them into trees, while other things crumbled to dust. I was horrified. What would Mr. Mortimer say when he returned? Then I hit my forehead, scolding myself, as we had bigger problems. I glanced at the bundle in Eleanor's arms and then noticed a mirror, realizing I'd become an old man. I saw my wrinkled face, gray hair, and dull eyes. I'm only 16, but I've aged so much. This realization horrified me. Fearing I would stay this way, I gathered my thoughts and headed deeper into the shop. Suddenly, amid the chaos, I saw an unfamiliar man. He looked like a medieval character. A goatee, a sly face, a strange costume. I thought, who is this? Who else has come here? But then he saw us and started jumping joyfully as if he'd seen close friends. Wait! Who are you? I shouted. In response, he laughed and said, How do you not recognize me? Then he laughed again, clearly enjoying the moment. I started to get angry and, raising my cane, hit him on the head, grumbling like an old man. The man yelped and, rubbing his head, plaintively said, It's me, Yorick. I was stunned, going through all the familiar names in my head. Then I remembered Yorick, the very living skull that always helped and guided me. It was a miracle. Yorick, looking at us, said, I see the chronics affected you too. I was lucky. When it passed by, I caught its attention, and it returned me to my youthful days. He proudly stroked his beard. I was about to hit him on the head again, irritated by his smug face, but Eleanor interrupted us. We need to hurry, or you'll stay in this state forever. I feared such an outcome and, with a trembling voice, asked Yorick where the grabber was. He cheerfully hopped to a cabinet in the corner. Opening the middle drawer, he pulled out a blue glove made from some scaly creature's skin and handed it to Eleanor. He flatly refused to catch the chronics himself, fearing he'd turn back into a skull. We quickly gathered a few more necessary magical items in a pouch that could come in handy. Eleanor carefully packed them, and we headed outside, determined to find this dangerous creature. We ran out onto the street and found ourselves in a narrow alley. It was morning, and the sunlight filtered through the thick canopy of trees, creating a play of light and shadow on the chipped stone walls of old buildings. The alley was narrow, lined with overflowing trash bins filled with old newspapers, plastic bottles, and various trash left by the residents. I pulled out a special compass from the bag and tuned it to find the chronics. The compass needle jerked sharply and pointed north, towards the street intersection. We immediately rushed there when we heard a scream. In the alley stood a woman screaming at the top of her lungs, her face distorted with fear. I tried to understand what had happened and saw a small crocodile lying next to her. I couldn't understand how it got there. But then I heard Eleanor's voice. I see a brand mark on this crocodile. It must have been a handbag once. That's the point, I replied in my old man's voice. I couldn't see anything due to poor eyesight. We left the woman to scream and headed in the direction the compass pointed, expecting the worst. Soon we saw a man on the road looking around in shock. He sat in a car that looked like it had traveled 1,000 years. The car was all rusty, the body covered in holes and cracks, the windows were missing, and the tires were just rusty rims. The man, bewildered and not understanding how this could have happened, clung to the steering wheel as if it was his last hope. Moving further, we noticed that the street began to resemble a post-apocalyptic landscape. The chronics seemed to have accelerated the growth of all the plants in the area. Trees and shrubs broke through the asphalt, their roots tearing up the sidewalks, and the branches formed a dense canopy of greenery, blocking out part of the sunlight. We continued running, ignoring the bewildered faces of passers-by, and suddenly the compass pointed sharply to the east. We turned into a small alley with trash bins and saw the chronics there, entertaining itself by turning a seed into a watermelon and back. It was so engrossed in its activity that it seemed oblivious to the world around it. We were delighted to have found it. Eleanor handed the baby to Thomas and, putting on the glove, began to carefully approach the bronze little man. I thought we were finally about to catch it, when suddenly two shadows jumped out in front of us. They were two men in black suits and faceless masks. The faceless ones. Apparently, they were also interested in this creature. They pulled out long, narrow daggers that gleamed in the daylight. These daggers looked deadly, and I knew they wouldn't stop at anything to achieve their goal. But before I could do anything, Yorick stepped forward. He confidently said, "I'll handle this." His voice was calm, and a smile played on his lips. He pulled a deck of playing cards from his pocket, and I noticed that each card glowed with a strange light. Were these the illusionist Vincenzo Corpaccio's cards? I had once come across them but couldn't manage them, as they required strong mental control. But I knew their power. Each suit had specific properties. Diamonds created shields, spades gave control over the opponent, clubs were offensive magic that pierced the enemy like spears, and hearts could heal allies. It seemed Yorick controlled them well, as the cards spun between his fingers like those of an experienced magician. He stood, shuffling them and smiling foolishly. The faceless ones wasted no time and rushed at us with their daggers ready. Yorick, with a quick flick of his wrist, threw one of the cards. It was the 6 of spades. It suddenly stuck to one attacker's forehead, and he, abruptly stopping, turned to his partner and engaged him in battle. We stood and watched as they clashed. The first faceless one, under Yorick's control, attacked his partner with mad fury. Their daggers flashed in the air, clashing with metallic clangs. The second faceless one desperately defended himself, trying to understand what was happening. Finally, he managed to tear the card off his comrade's forehead. Both faceless ones stopped and, turning to us, looked with hatred. At least I thought so, as their masks showed nothing. Suddenly, one of them pulled a vial from his pocket and threw it on the floor. A thick fog began to spread around. Yorick quickly told us to stay close, and the two of them vanished into the mist like ninjas. Visibility dropped to 0, and an attack could come from any side. Yorick pulled out 6 cards at once, from 2 to 7 of diamonds. Throwing them, he created a rotating shield around us. Suddenly, one of the faceless ones jumped out of the fog. The 3 of diamonds reflected his blow, and our defender wasted no time. Yorick threw the 3 of clubs, which flew like an arrow at the opponent and knocked him out. One faceless one remained. We waited for the attack, but it didn't come. Suddenly, I heard a whistle from above and realized the second one decided to attack from there. I wanted to raise my cane to meet him, but suddenly the Queen of Spades appeared behind the attacker. Where she came from, I didn't understand. Perhaps Yorick had thrown her earlier. The Queen of Spades, growing to human size, delivered a powerful punch to the attacker's head, knocking him out. Finally, we defeated them. Yorick whispered something, and the fog dissipated. The cards returned to his deck. I exhaled like an old man, massaging my sore back, then looked around for the bronze man. He was nowhere to be seen. We realized that while we fought, the chronics had escaped again. We used the compass again and ran in the right direction. Along the way, we saw various strange things, confirming we were on the right path. I exhaled with relief because it seemed the creature didn't affect ordinary people. We had to speed up, but soon I was out of breath, bending over, holding my knees, trying to catch my breath. Wait, I'll be right there. I tried to catch my breath, but we didn't have time. Then Yorick approached me and offered his back. I climbed onto him and, pointing with my cane, shouted, Excellent, grandson, forward! At that moment, I noticed the angry looks of my friends and realized I was really turning into an old man. Soon we reached a bridge. It was huge, made of iron beams, and pedestrian traffic on it was limited. But that didn't stop us. We ran forward along the edge of the bridge, ignoring the annoyed honks of passing cars. Suddenly, Eleanor shouted and pointed upwards. There, people in black suits were jumping across the cables and beams. They were the faceless ones. How annoying, I thought. Soon we saw the bronze man walking leisurely along the edge of the bridge. We rushed towards him, and our enemies did the same. The Chronics noticed he was surrounded from several sides and seemed to panic. We felt a vibration that spread across the bridge. I realized he was starting to collapse from the flow of time. I was scared, as many people were driving on the bridge who could die. I told Yorick about this, and he rummaged through my bag, pulling out a glue gun. He squeezed out a magical substance onto the bridge, which spread, strengthening it, and it stopped shaking. "This will buy us some time," said the former talking skull. I looked at the Chronics again, and saw that the faceless ones were getting closer. They threw something like a cage at him, causing the creature to panic. We ran towards them. Yorick pulled out the deck again and threw the cards. This time they were jacks, who flew out of the cards, grew, and then engaged in battle with the faceless ones. I moved as fast as I could. Eleanor, holding the baby, almost reached the man. But I didn't like how nervous the creature was. It was starting to glow, and a loud ticking of clocks echoed in our heads. Suddenly, the baby started crying, adding more tension to the strange atmosphere. The glow grew stronger, and the little man began to tremble in the cage. I thought something was about to happen, and suddenly, a strong flash of blue light engulfed us. We found ourselves in an open field. The ground underfoot was trampled, and around us stood people in ancient Roman gladiatorial armor, their bodies clad in massive cuirasses, shining helmets with crests, bracers, and greaves. All this happened suddenly and without warning. I looked around and realized we were in the middle of a huge arena, the Colosseum. The stands were filled with spectators who were shouting and whistling, enjoying the fight. But our sudden appearance in the middle of the battle caused shock. The stands instantly fell silent, and the gladiators stopped, looking at us in confusion. Suddenly, several gates on the sides of the arena opened sharply, and lions sprang out. Everything happened so quickly that I didn't have time to understand where we had landed. I looked at my comrades and saw they were equally stunned. The three faceless ones had also been transported with us. They quickly surveyed the scene, dropped something at their feet, and vanished into the air like shadows. Once again, I was convinced that an unknown force, possibly a ninja organization, was working against us. The Chronics appeared next to us. Eleanor noticed him and, ready, extended her hand with the glove. But to my horror, he jumped at me. I tried to fend him off and threw my cane at him but missed. The Chronics touched my leg and ran off. There was a flash of light and a vibration surrounded me. I remembered the skeleton lying in our basement and thought it was the end, but to my surprise, I was fine. I looked at myself and realized I had returned to my original state. Damn, I was really happy about that. Eleanor was about to run after the Chronics, but a lion's roar interrupted us, charging at us. First, we had to fend him off. Yorick stepped forward and used his cards again. With his deck, dealing with the lion was not difficult. He threw the 10 of spades, which stuck to the lion's forehead. The lion froze, wagged his tail, then approached me and began rubbing against my leg. It was a creepy sight, and the stands remained silent. The gladiators had already defeated the second lion and were looking at us in astonishment. As I stood, I noticed the cane I had carried as an old man beside me. It hadn't disappeared. With surprise, I approached and picked it up. The cane was made of beautiful wood, covered with strange inscriptions and patterns. My initials were engraved on the top. I wondered why it hadn't disappeared with everything else. If it had my initials, it meant it would belong to me in the future. I raised the cane, deciding to keep it. Maybe it was some sort of artifact. Soon the gates on the sides of the arena opened again, and legionnaires emerged, surrounding us. Their armor gleamed in the sun, helmets with crests, massive cuirasses, bracers, and greaves. They held short swords and round shields, ready for battle. The man standing on the platform said something loudly in Latin. I didn't understand a word, but Yorick, catching the meaning, quickly translated. He's asking who we are. I was at a loss, not knowing what to say. But suddenly Yorick shouted something in response, and the stands erupted in noise. The man raised his hand again, and everyone fell silent. It was clear he was shocked. "What did you say to him?" I asked, not understanding what was happening. "I told him we are messengers of the gods," Yorick replied proudly. I was confused and started to ponder where we had ended up. Could this be some sort of theatrical performance? But Yorick shook his head. "We've traveled back in time, and we're not in ancient America, but in ancient Rome. The Chronix has power not only over time, but also over space," Yorick explained. I listened to him in shock, longing for normal days. After that, he rummaged in my pouch and pulled out a small matchbox. Opening it, he showed me what was inside. It wasn't matches, but sawdust with purple larvae crawling in it, resembling maggots. I remembered once going fishing with my father and buying such larvae for bait. They looked quite disgusting. Yorick took out one larva and handed it to me. I looked at him in surprise. "Put it in your ear," he said. "Are you crazy?" I shouted. "It's a polyglot larva. With it, you'll be able to understand all languages," Yorick explained. "When we were in China, you translated for me just fine," I countered. "Then I was in the form of a skull and used my magic. I can't do that now, so just take it," Yorick insisted. I resisted, but suddenly Eleanor, without hesitation, took the larva and put it in her ear, then smiled at me. I had no choice but to repeat her actions. The larva caused unpleasant sensations, but soon I felt it settle in my ear and become unnoticeable. I turned my head and saw that the man was addressing us again, asking if we would like to go to the palace. This time I could understand him, but could I speak the language? As soon as I thought about it, unfamiliar words flowed from my mouth. How convenient, except for the larva in my ear. We decided to accept his offer as the baby, Thomas, was starting to cry again, probably hungry. The ranks of legionaries parted, and we were led through the Colosseum. We walked through narrow passages, passing through arches and corridors lit by torches. Stepping outside, I was amazed by the view of the city. Stone buildings with red-tiled roofs stretched along cobblestone streets. Statues of gods and heroes stood on every corner, and fountains with clear water delighted the eye. People dressed in tunics and togas looked at us with curiosity, like celebrities. We crossed bustling markets where vendors shouted their wares and passed majestic temples. Soon a palace loomed before us. It was enormous, with marble columns and gold decorations. The interior halls were stunning. Mosaic floors, walls painted with frescoes, and high windows letting in light. We were brought to luxurious palace chambers and served food. The city's leader, a majestic and stern man, bowed to us and asked what we desired. He kept glancing at the lion, which had been walking beside us the whole time as if guarding. We'll rest a bit and then start our search. We need to find something, I said. He bowed again and promised to help. We fed the baby and then ate ourselves. I felt noticeably tired and lay down, not realizing when I fell asleep. When I woke up, it was deep night. Eleanor was asleep and Yorick was standing on the terrace looking at the stars. I approached him and saw what he was looking at. In the distance, a large mountain was visible. It was a volcano that seemed to be starting to erupt. Where are we? I thought, wanting to ask Yorick. But he looked thoughtful. When he finally looked at me, I asked, "What are you thinking about?" "I never thought I'd be human again," he replied. "My past life ended ingloriously. I served as an ornament for a vain poet for a long time. One day my master found me, and my life changed. Now I'm here, alive, breathing and moving. I'm thinking about how to use the second chance I've been given." I listened to him and realized that behind the mask of a smiling and playful man lay deep sorrow and heavy memories. I patted him on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry, son, everything will be all right." Yorick looked at me reproachfully, and I immediately apologized. "It seems that old man hasn't completely left me yet." We both laughed, waking Eleanor. She came out, stretching, and asked what was happening. Then she looked at the volcano and thought, "What city is this?" she asked worriedly, covering her mouth as if realizing something. We shrugged, realizing we had forgotten to ask the city's leader where we were. At that moment, I noticed a young man under the balcony about my age, standing as if he were eavesdropping on our conversation. I called out to him, "Hey, you boy, what city is this?" The young man looked at us attentively, then skillfully climbed the branches of a tree growing nearby, and soon was on the balcony. He had black hair, brown eyes, a lean but muscular build, and was dressed in a simple tunic. I had seen him somewhere before. "Don't messengers of the gods know where they are? How strange," he said with a hint of sarcasm. We exchanged glances. This young man was clearly no fool, but suddenly Yorick fell to his knees before him, which was so unexpected that the boy stepped back. "Master, it's you, I recognize you, it's me, Yorick," he shouted, tears appearing in his eyes. The boy just stared at him, not understanding what was happening. Eleanor and I lifted Yorick and tried to calm him. Eleanor asked, "Why is he acting like this?" I looked closely at the young man and suddenly remembered the reflection in the mirror. The realization struck me. This was Mr. Mortimer, but in his youth. I gasped in surprise. We decided to go inside and invited the boy to join us. He looked at us distrustfully but followed. It was clear he wasn't afraid. In the room, we laid Yorick on the cushions and then asked the boy his name. He reluctantly introduced himself. "My name is Mark. I am the son of the city's leader, and our city is called Pompeii." When he said that, Eleanor and I simultaneously jumped up and rushed to the terrace to look at the volcano. No way. Could we really be in that ill-fated city just before the eruption? How much time do we have left? We returned to the room and told Yorick that we needed to go find the chronics. The young man looked at us with a puzzled expression. He saw that we were afraid of something and was quite perceptive. I didn't know if we should tell him the truth, but this was Mr. Mortimer, and he seemingly hadn't acquired his powers yet. What should we do? Then I decided and said, "The volcano is going to wake up soon and destroy the city. You need to run." The young man just snorted. "I thought you were serious. This volcano often wakes up, so you're worrying for nothing." "Don't you believe the messengers of the gods?" I asked, to which he only shrugged. Then Yorick pulled out one of his cards and, noticing a wound on the young man's arm, placed it. The 5 of hearts. Suddenly, the wound began to heal, causing Mark to open his mouth in surprise. "See?" I said. The young man nervously swallowed, then ran out of the room. We didn't stop him and started gathering our things. I pulled out the compass and tuned it to the Chronix's aura, bringing it close to the baby. Then we stepped out onto the balcony. Yorick pulled out the diamond cards, which formed a staircase, and we descended. As we passed through the garden, we heard a noise behind us. Turning around, I saw the boy again. Mark had caught up with us, catching his breath, and then said, "I warned my father. At first he didn't believe me, so I showed him the healed wound. I got it this morning while training with a sword, and he saw it. After that, he had no more questions and said he would organize an evacuation." Something stirred in my heart. Aren't we changing the past this way? Will we return to our time only to find, for example, that Hitler won or something else? But there was no time to think. I pushed all those thoughts out of my mind and headed in the direction the compass pointed. The young man said he would go with us. I refused, telling him to save himself. He wouldn't back down. I waved my hand. Let him do what he wants. We left the garden and found ourselves on the streets of Pompeii. The city's night streets were almost empty, but from time to time, we encountered people who looked at us with curiosity. Majestic buildings and ancient temples adorned with bas-reliefs and statues of gods passed us by. We ran past markets where night vendors remained and past houses where people slept, unaware of the impending danger. We passed the baths, which stood in silence, and a massive amphitheater shrouded in darkness. The compass confidently pointed the way, and we followed it without stopping for a moment. Finally, we reached a temple that towered over the city, its columns reaching into the sky. The entrance was adorned with massive doors carved with scenes from myths. We paused for a moment to catch our breath and entered. Inside the temple, there was silence and peace. The marble floors reflected the light from torches placed around the perimeter. The walls were decorated with frescoes depicting scenes of worship to the gods. In the center of the hall stood a huge altar covered in gold and silver decorations. In the corners of the hall stood statues of gods, staring at us with empty eyes. Yorick looked around carefully, and his gaze lingered on one of the statues. It was the god Mercury with a staff and winged sandals. He approached the statue and noticed something unusual. He pulled the staff, and suddenly there was a dull sound. A secret passage opened in the wall next to the altar. We cautiously entered. It was narrow and dark. Yorick lit a torch, and we moved forward. Inside the passage, it was cool and damp, the walls covered with moss and cobwebs. We ran down the narrow corridor, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. I kept looking over my shoulder, and so did Eleanor. Apparently, she noticed it too. As we moved, I examined the walls adorned with strange, alien drawings. It wasn't the style of ancient Rome, but something reminiscent of Inca hieroglyphs, or even older. The walls were decorated with images of various monsters and creatures that sent a chill down my spine. We continued walking, and to my surprise, nothing happened. This unusual silence and calm began to worry me. It never happened that everything went so smoothly. Just as I thought that, I heard the creak of a mechanism. The next second, the floor beneath us gave way, and we fell down. Soon water enveloped me with a cold embrace. Thank goodness it wasn't spikes. The water reached our waists. Looking around, I started to search for an exit, but found nothing. The entrance through which we fell had closed, trapping us. I looked at my friends, who seemed unusually calm, used to such surprises. Eleanor was holding the baby. Luckily, he was unharmed. "What should we do?" I asked, when suddenly I noticed the water level rising quickly. "Not again," I cursed and started rummaging through the pouch, searching for something that could save us. There were many items whose properties I didn't know. I called Yorick over and asked for his help. He started sifting through the contents of the pouch and with the words, "This will do," pulled out a small jar. Inside were round red tablets. "Take one each," Yorick said, handing out the tablets to each of us. We then took the baby and placed him in a special compartment in the pouch designed for magical creatures. I felt a bit guilty, but we had no other choice. Besides, Thomas is a werewolf, and he wouldn't scold me for this, I hoped. Meanwhile, Mark looked at the tablet with surprise, not understanding what to do with it. "Just swallow it," I said. He obeyed. I did the same and waited. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect. The water was rising higher, and suddenly I started to suffocate. Then I realized I needed to dive. Submerging myself in the water, I felt air starting to flow into my body through gills that appeared on my neck under my ears. So that's it, I thought, feeling the panic subside. Soon the water completely engulfed us. We began to search for an exit and found it at the bottom, where there was a round hole that could fit a couple of people. Diving in, we swam through a narrow corridor that first went vertically down, but then transitioned to a horizontal position. We continued swimming until the corridor started to rise again. Finally, we surfaced and found ourselves in a huge hall. It was majestic and grim. It was lit by orange veins running along the ceiling, which was supported by high columns adorned with carvings and strange hieroglyphs. The walls were covered with frescoes depicting scenes from myths and legends full of horror and pain. Statues of demons lined the walls, their eyes seemingly alive in the dim light, following our every move. But the most impressive thing was in the center of the hall, a huge statue of a demon that was truly terrifying. It depicted a creature resembling a bat, but much more dreadful. The wings folded behind its back seemed ready to unfold at any moment and engulf the hall. The demon's head was crowned with horns, and its eyes glowed with a sinister red light. Its clawed hands were extended forward, as if ready to grab anyone who dared to approach. On the statue's chest was carved a symbol in the shape of a blood drop, which seemed to pulse with dark energy that penetrated deep into the soul. We climbed out of the water, completely drenched, water streaming off us, but we paid no attention. We started looking around for the bronze man. Suddenly, Eleanor quietly said, "There he is, standing by the statue. Just don't scare him away," Eleanor whispered. I took the glove from her and began to approach the chronics, trying to move silently. The creature didn't take its eyes off the statue, seeming to be absorbed by something invisible to us. I was almost upon him when suddenly something fell from the ceiling. I jumped back and, looking around, saw who it was. "Damn, I'm so tired of these guys," I cursed. It was the faceless ones again, and there were 3 of them. They rushed at me with their daggers, their gleaming blades menacing in the dim light. I raised my cane and parried one attack. Yorick immediately came to my aid, taking on the other 2. Mark watched in astonishment, his mouth open as if he couldn't believe his eyes. One of the faceless ones lunged at me again, and I fended him off with my cane, knowing it was ineffective. A thought flashed through my mind. If only I had a sword! Suddenly, the cane transformed into a long, beautiful sword. Even the faceless one paused, amazed at the change. But then I resumed the fight, feeling like I was still losing. It was difficult since I had never trained in fencing. The faceless one gradually pressed me against the wall, and it looked like I was about to be finished off. Suddenly, I felt something move at my waist and realized something was emerging from the pouch. A small creature, about the size of a dog, suddenly leaped towards the faceless one and began to gnaw at him. He screamed and tried to fend it off, but soon the creature bit through his neck and he collapsed to the ground unconscious. The little creature turned to me, wagging its tail. I looked at it and realized it was Thomas in his werewolf form. He barked and ran to Eleanor, jumping into her arms. She started petting him affectionately. "You little rascal," I muttered to myself and ran to find the Chronics. To my horror, I found him on the statue. I dashed forward with all my might. Nearby, Yorick was fighting the faceless ones. But I didn't make it in time. A flash and vibration occurred, and the statue suddenly came to life. Stones began falling from it like a shell, and it roared like a nightmare creature. The demon was terrifying. Its wings unfolded, casting menacing shadows, and its eyes glowed a bright red. Its horned head turned toward us, and a sinister grin filled my mind with fear. Suddenly, it roared, and we felt an earthquake that knocked us to the ground, followed by an explosion. I realized the volcano had awakened. Meanwhile, the demon raised its clawed hands and prepared to attack. "Back!" I shouted, trying to defend with the sword. The demon, ignoring our attempts, began to advance. Yorick threw a card that embedded itself in the demon's paw, but this only angered the creature. Eleanor, holding Thomas, retreated, trying to keep the baby safe. Yorick started throwing diamond cards that formed a magical wall, and the jacks engaged in battle with the animated demon statue. I wondered what kind of creature it was while it tried to break through the barrier. Looking around, I tried to think of a way to defeat it. Suddenly, I noticed a detailed painting on the wall. It depicted the same demon, but with a spear pierced through it. "That's it," I whispered, looking at the image, and began searching the room for the spear. It was nowhere to be seen. Then I saw the Chronics sneaking nearby like a guilty cat leaving the scene. Without hesitation, I grabbed him with the gloved hand. The Chronics tried to escape, but the glove held him. "Take us back!" I demanded, but the Chronics shook his head, which only angered me. Then I saw lava flowing from the wall and brought him closer to it. The Chronics started struggling fiercely, apparently disliking the fire. "Will you do it?" I asked again, this time holding him even closer to the hot lava. The Chronics nodded affirmatively. I ran to my friends, holding him tightly. Yorick was still fighting, holding the demon at bay with his cards. Reaching them, I shouted, "We can go back!" But Yorick objected. "What about the master?" Right. I had forgotten about Mark. I wanted to shout at him to run, but saw that the exit was already blocked. What should we do? We couldn't take him to the future with us, or Mr. Mortimer wouldn't exist. It was a dilemma. Suddenly, an idea struck me. I took the cane and imagined a spear. The cane immediately transformed into a beautiful spear made of black material with a red, sharp stone tip. It was exactly like the one depicted on the wall. I was about to hand it to Yorick when suddenly Mark jumped out of nowhere and snatched it from my hands. We all looked at him with confused expressions. "Are you crazy?" I shouted. "I can handle it from here," Mark replied firmly. "Thank you for warning us about the volcano. I know you need to go." "Go, I'll take care of this." I wanted to argue, but Eleanor interrupted me. "He will survive." You know that, right? And I understood. We would meet him in the future, in our shop. So I shouted to the Chronics, "Take us back to the shop." He began to glow gradually. I saw Mark running towards the demon and throwing the spear. Surprisingly, he hit it on the first try. The spear pierced the demon's heart and the creature screamed. Red energy began to flow from it, right into Mark. He screamed in pain, but I couldn't help as I was engulfed in a blue flash. The next moment we found ourselves in our shop, surrounded by familiar walls and comfort, although the same mess remained that we had left before our journey. Meister Mortimer was still not there. Holding the Chronics, the first thing I did was point to Thomas and ordered him to return him to his original form. The Chronics obeyed, albeit reluctantly. The next moment, Thomas was standing in the middle of the shop, not understanding what had happened. "I'll explain everything later," I promised him, trying to calm him down. Then I told the little man to tidy up the shop, and that too was done. Finally, I breathed a sigh of relief. Yorick brought a small clock house, and we placed the Chronics inside. It was a containment artifact designed to keep him under control. While we were dealing with this, I kept my eyes on Eleanor. She was quite the thief, and my suspicious gaze offended her. With a raised nose, she left the shop without saying goodbye. I wanted to stop her, but waved it off. Finally, it was over, and I could return home to my family. A week passed, but Meister Mortimer still hadn't returned. We began to panic when, early one morning, a seagull flew in through the open window. It carried a letter in its beak with the word "help." The three of us exchanged puzzled glances, not understanding who it was from, but one thing was clear: another adventure awaited us.